Hey, this is Tom Bentey, Tom Bentey Media Podcast, and I'm here with SEO expert Damon Burton. He's here to talk about how he used his expertise as an SEO expert to beat out billion-dollar corporations. I think right before the 2008 recession, to showcase online strategies to help businesses grow and develop during a very difficult economic time. He's also going to talk a little bit about personal branding and standing out online from an entrepreneurial standpoint, and just best practices for online usage and for social media. So, Damon, thanks so much for joining me. I'm really excited to talk about this. I have an interest in building my own personal brand online, and I'm a video marketer and filmmaker, and I work with clients to tell stories. So just, I guess, generally, to start off the conversation, what are some of your basic tips to really stand out from a search engine optimization standpoint, and how small businesses can actually compete with these big organizations that have billions of dollars?
Yeah, a little bit of what you touched on in the intro, you mentioned the word story, and it really just basically boils down to that is sharing your own story. So like a really simple way to look at this from an entrepreneurial perspective is we're all experts in something, and ideally that's why you're doing that thing. And if not, why are you doing it if you're not passionate about it and don't have a skill set behind it? So there should be something that you should be able to share from a unique perspective of whatever your history is behind the thing that you do or why you're passionate behind the thing that you do. And that differentiator of your ability to share the stories is what you can leverage. So we can talk about that from an SEO perspective. We can talk about that from a social media perspective. So I mean, we can go super deep. So why don't I just give some high level things, and then you can direct which path we want to go down. So on the SEO side, where you can really leverage against yourself on the smaller business side against these bigger corporations, is sharing those stories and digging into what are people already asking search engines? What is your ideal buyer already asking? So there's all sorts of tools we can talk about. Many of them are free, and you can go to these tools and go, I want to show up and monetize for keyword XYZ. And it'll say, great, here's what people are already asking about XYZ. And that's the big problem that a lot of these people have jumping into SEO is they just shotgun it. And so instead, you can take a very methodical approach and go, here are the things that my ideal buyer is already asking. Great. How can I share my expertise and my background and my passion and my storytelling about those things that align with your ideal buyer's mindset? And then just share your perspective on those things. And it's the unique value that you can provide from a unique perspective that is going to rank you uniquely to drive the unique traffic. So that's a high level example on the SEO side. And then on the social media side, it's basically the same thing. We can talk about how I built a multi-million-dollar agency without ever spending a dollar on ads. And the simple answer is I share stories. I talk about live case studies, but more importantly, talk about my appreciation for my wife and kids. And so then people relate to you as a human. So they might pay your company, but they buy because they've earned your trust. So it basically just boils down to storytelling.
Yeah, I think you bring up some great points. Like, it's not just about business all the time, especially now in today's modern climate. It's about who you are as a person, who you are as a brand, and highlighting that through storytelling on social media. How often would you recommend a small business post? I mean, is there too much, or can you kind of just post all the time? Or do you think it can be a little bit of an overkill and kind of turn the audience off?
So it's quality over quantity. So it depends on that. So if it's not quality, yes, you can post too much. But we can kind of segment that into posting on your website versus posting on social media. So on your website, there's no such thing as too much good content. So as long as it's unique, value added, solves a problem, post as much as you can. Now, I would say don't force yourself to post, because then you force yourself to start diluting the message and just posting just to post. Um, I try to, for our fulfillment, what we recommend for clients is aim for at least once a week, once every 2 weeks at a minimum, because there is value in the consistency. But again, don't just do it just to do it. If you have to force yourself, then you're probably going to dilute the value of the message. There's a whole bunch of things we can talk about as far as strategy and how you can build out a content calendar to make that a little bit easier. But in general, quality over quantity. Now on social media, there can be too much, and it's going to vary depending on the platform. Your reach is also going to vary depending on the platform. So my biggest reach is on LinkedIn, and the reach within LinkedIn is 24 to 36 hours. Your reach on Twitter is like nanoseconds. It's like less than a minute. And your reach on Facebook can be a couple days. So it depends on where your audience is, and then B, which platform that audience is on, because there's different algorithms and different reach and potential based on the algorithms of those platforms.
Very cool. So, in terms of actually paying for ads, and I know there's with search engine optimization, there's also search engine marketing where you could pay for the ads. And from what I understand, the ads on Google are what you see on the top and on the side of the search results. Um, have you seen results in that? Do you recommend clients actually paying for ads, or do you think search engine optimization is much more viable for small businesses?
It depends on the client and the industry because I'm not a marketer that throws rocks at other forms of advertising because I think it's not a zero-sum game. You know, it depends on your situation. There are advantages and disadvantages though. So I think that's where you make your decision. So depending on the industry you're in and largely your cash flow and your patience too. So the advantages of paid ads is you can get quicker traction, you get quicker data to make other decisions on. But the disadvantage is you have a smaller profit margin. Now, SEO is almost the complete opposite. It's a little bit slower because you're building up the credibility of your website. It's largely based on aggregating content. So it takes time to research, create, and distribute that content. But once it kicks in, it's a lot more stable and it grows consistently. And you own the assets. So you own the content that you created. With paid ads, the second you turn it off, it's gone. So it really just depends. You know, do you want to put $1 in and get $1.10 back or $2 back? So paid ads is going to be like that. SEO, it's going to be $1 in and nothing back, and then $1 in and nothing back. But then you fast forward and it becomes $1 in and $5,000 out. So it depends on if you have the cash flow and the patience to get to that point. Now, if not, you can do a hybrid. You can do paid ads in the beginning, get a little cash flow coming. And then as you get enough of a safety net built up and SEO starts to kick in, then you can sub out the other. Now you can run both too, but maybe the last example of the advantages and disadvantages is paid ads is great. You can get exposure. But what's interesting, there was a study by a company called Conductor that they kind of generalized all industries and all traffic sources. And what the data showed was that paid ads drives only 6% of traffic in general. Some industries will be higher and lower as far as source to website. So if you're doing awesome on paid ads, keep doing it. But organic drove 64% of traffic. So just think about all that opportunity and money you're leaving on the table if you're not also including some sort of organic reach.
Interesting. So now that you're talking about working with small businesses and either search engine marketing, search engine optimization, and there's pros and cons to both, and it depends on the circumstances of each individual business and in which works better, or maybe starting with search engine marketing, going into search engine optimization. Does this relate at all to personal branding? I mean, I know personal branding is a very big part of the landscape right now. I teach a course in marketing and media at a university in New Jersey, and we talk a lot about personal branding, how it can help you get a job, how it can help you build an audience and build client base. And really having an audience in pretty much whatever sector you're in, there's a lot of value there. So it's not just media personalities. If you're in real estate, if you're even a doctor, a lawyer, like if you have a audience base, like that's what you're aiming for. So is the strategy different if it's kind of personal branding, or is it a very similar type of way of going about it?
From my perspective, it's very similar because even my own agency is a good example. We do little to no branding or marketing for the agency, but we continue to grow year after year because of my personal branding. So I do a bunch on LinkedIn, I do a bunch on Facebook, and it's all the storytelling things that we mentioned earlier. And because of that, we continue to scale and scale and scale. And so when I look at, so I've had my agency for 16 years. And the first 14 years, the only source of traffic and sales was referrals. In the last 2 to 3 years, what's caught up and probably outpaced that is leads from personal branding. So this gets into talking about personal branding on social media. So my biggest reach on LinkedIn, I show up Monday through Friday and I post consistently on there. What that does is it builds trust with an audience. And then you also get rewarded from the algorithms on these platforms. The more consistently you're on there, the more they're going to showcase that content. So over time, what happens is people begin to look at Tom as the expert in what you offer. And then Damon is no longer an SEO option. He is the only SEO option. So whatever it is that you offer as a product or service, be consistent in sharing stories about it, because then you continue to grow that expertise and that reach, and you become the only option. And so now we're in a position with our agency that we don't, I get tagged probably weekly from other people asking questions, and I've never even met those other people. I don't know who they are that are tagging me, but it's because I built up a reach through personal branding. And it's largely what we talked about earlier about sharing stories. So my approach, I'm primarily on two platforms, Facebook and LinkedIn. My team will take a lot of content, repurpose it on other things, but I spend my time on Facebook and LinkedIn because that's where my audience is. And the way I split it is LinkedIn is obviously a little bit more business oriented. So for the listeners, look at where your audience is. So my product is B2B, LinkedIn is more B2B. So on there, I share probably 70-30, 70% business talk, 30% family talk. On Facebook, it's a little more personal business balance. So it's probably 50-50 between personal and business. But what happens is I grow the reach based on the expertise that I offer. And so here's what I'd recommend to the listeners is give away all your secrets, give away all the content for free, because we don't have a knowledge problem. Everybody has a phone and can go look up anything on YouTube. But what they will pay for is the trust and the implementation. So every time I make a post, I just give away all the advice and I almost never have a call to action. Because when you have, I'm not saying don't do a call to action, right? There's pros and cons. But from my perspective, when you do a call to action, it's almost like a tiny bait and switch, and you're kind of asking from them. So instead, what I do is I just give. And then here's how this turns into sales is over time, because you've never asked anything and you've only given, you earn their trust. And then there's only three types of content consumers. So there's the type of person that reads your information, takes your expertise, and then runs. Well, that's fine because they were never your buyer anyway, but now you just increased your reputation. Two is the type of person that reads your information, trusts you, doesn't need your thing now, but will come back later. And then the third is the person that just needs your thing and buys. So what they do is they end up private messaging you and saying, hey, Damon, I know you do SEO. That's great. We'll talk about that here in a minute. I want to start, but that was really cool what you said about your wife and kids. So that's where the storytelling comes in, is people will follow you for the expertise that you offer, but they're going to convert once they relate to you on something as a human.
How did you figure all this out? I know you said you started during the 2008 recession or right before. Obviously, a very different time from a digital marketing and social media standpoint. Obviously, a very tumultuous time from an economic standpoint. How did this come all into play, and how has the game changed since '08?
Well, the SEO side, a lot of SEOs will disagree with me on this, but I don't think it's changed an awful lot. Because if you look at it from a technical perspective, there's a lot that can go into SEO, but it's primarily three areas of fulfillment. One is how well your site is structured. So can Google and customers load it quickly? Is it mobile friendly and easy to use? Two is content. This gets into the storytelling. Do you clearly communicate your value propositions and why you're better than the alternative choices? Three is external credibility. Do other people talk about your brand and your product and service and link to it? All three of those are still the main categories of fulfillment, what drives search engines to this day. So if we look back at algorithms that have changed over the years, there's been algorithms, the SEOs will be familiar with two big ones in 2011 and 12. One was called Panda, one was called Penguin. They both completely changed the landscape of who showed up where on search engines. But all they were in the simplest form is write good content, don't steal it from other people, and have good credibility. So then you fast forward to, maybe some more recent changes in algorithms like voice search, then it's the same thing. There's no webmaster or business owner on the other side of the phone recording these voice drops to reply to voice queries. Instead, what's happening is when you ask Siri or Google or whatever, what it's doing is going, who has the right answer? So good content that I can access the quickest, so good user experience, and that I trust, so external credibility. And then it's just, so the voice is just an input-output mechanism, but behind the scenes, it's really just doing the same old search engine thing, looking for a good, credible website with good content, good answers. So over the years, there's been different variations of the things that, the mechanisms that tap into those three sources of fulfillment on SEO, but really at its core, it's the same old thing, nearly 2 decades later.
Oh, very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the case studies that you've worked on and how you really transformed some of these organizations to generate new revenue streams and just build the whole brand?
Yeah, so when we start on a campaign, it's fun to dig into the industry. So we talked about these tools. I'll give some free tools to the audience. So one great tool that you can use is answerthepublic.com. It's free. You go there, and what you can do is this is where you start to unravel the opportunities to tell stories and build a brand. So what Answer the Public will do is you type in what you think you can monetize or the words you want to target, and it'll tell you what people are already asking. So when you go through that, It's going to reveal where the high and low demand of things that are already being asked, and that's your audience telling you what their pain points are. So that's your opportunity to go create content around that. So digging into these industries, there's a couple fun stories. One is when we were working with the Utah Jazz. They have a retail division called Team Store, and so the goal of that division is to sell more merchandise and jerseys and hats. So when we're going through these same tools that we're talking about and giving the audience, like Answer the Public, one of the things that we're trying to look for is like, how do we share more information about legacy players like John Stockton and Karl Malone on the Utah Jazz? So we can look at the obvious stuff like, okay, do we write another bunch of boring statistics that other websites have talked about 10,000 times about career statistics and what college these players went to? But what the data revealed that we would have never thought of, and the Jazz would have never thought of, is there was a lot of demand asking, how did Karl Malone die? Except Karl Malone's not dead. So then here's your great opportunity to go, okay, well, this is a unique position to rank because my competition isn't writing about this because Karl Malone isn't dead, but people that are interested in Karl Malone merchandise and jerseys and information are searching this. So then maybe in this example, you go, okay, here's the top 10 myths of how Karl Malone died. And then you create a piece of content about that because it aligns with the buyer intent of where the traffic and the consumer demand is. So you look for those little unicorns in there to tell a story about what it is that aligns with where the demand already is. Maybe one last example is there's been a fun client. They're actually still a client number one from 16 years ago. They're in the automotive industry, and it's cool to see how the storytelling ends up driving sales. So these guys went from doing 80,000 a year in online sales to now they do about 1.2 million per month. And the main thing that we've done over the course of those years is build up brand awareness through storytelling, through these same little tools of going, what are people asking about their industry?
Oh, very, very cool. Now, with Answer the Public, does that focus just on Google, and can that also relate to like YouTube queries as well?
Yeah, it'll aggregate from a couple different search engines. But you bring up a good point. So what you can do is, depending on what the platform is, most of these platforms nowadays have what's called autocomplete. So if you just go to whatever that tool is, whether it's YouTube, Google, Instagram, as you start to type out a thing that you want to show up for, the first couple characters or words, then it'll go, oh, hey, you probably mean this, and it'll autocomplete for you and give you suggestions. That's actually an insight into saying, well, based on the starting of what you're typing, this is what the majority of people ask. And so then you can use that as a signal to better understand what people are asking about that same thing. So that's a little insight as to where the demand is too.
Gotcha. And just to reiterate what you said earlier, it sounds like SEO is not always changing. It's, even though the algorithm might be changing, if you implement those practices that you were talking about, then you can still have really great results, even though things with the algorithm can change.
Yeah, I look at it two different ways. You can either cut corners. There are ways that you can look at new shiny objects and get a little bit of accelerated short-term wins, but eventually that's going to catch up to you. So it depends on if you want short-term money runs or long-term sustainability. So out of all these algorithm updates, we've never had a client get a penalty. And every time there's an algorithm update, we're either neutral or up while everybody else is getting crushed. So there's high risk, high reward things that you can do. But if you want consistency and stability, just stick to those fundamentals.
Very cool. Well, Damon, thanks. I mean, this has really been very helpful in terms of just building a presence and building a brand online, both for organizations, small businesses, and also for individuals like myself, who's really looking to build a presence and a brand with social media and with search engine optimization. Any last final parting thoughts to the audience in terms of best practices or tips that you could provide?
Yeah, be consistent. There's going to be rewards in the consistency, and then don't be afraid to trip over yourself a little bit. It takes a little while to figure out what your voice is, what you want to share, and how to be consistent at it. So the best way to start is just to start and then keep at it and kind of feel your way through it to kind of discover where you get engagement and what you're best at presenting.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Damon. How can my audience reach out to you?
Yeah, I appreciate your time. freeseobook.com. You can go there, free download, no upsell on a thank you page, and invite you to a Facebook group. And that'll actually walk through a bunch of these free tools as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.